picture this. You just spent, I don't know, your entire weekend applying for your absolute dream job.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there. It's exhausting.
Right. You tailored the cover letter perfectly to match their mission statement. Your resume is completely flawless.
You've proofread it like 5 times.
Exactly. So you hit submit, take a deep breath, and walk to the kitchen just to grab a glass of water.
Yeah.
But before you even open the fridge, your phone buzzes.
Oh.
Yeah. It's an email from the company. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes.
3 minutes. That is all it took for you to be entirely removed from consideration. So you have to ask yourself, who actually rejected you? Was it a human being or was it a machine?
Well, I mean, in today's labor market, the probability is overwhelmingly on the side of the machine.
Yeah.
The reality of modern talent acquisition is that we've essentially automated the front door to economic opportunity.
And that is exactly why we are dedicating today's deep dive to figuring out how that front door actually operates. We are pulling from a really comprehensive guide by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
Right. Ethical AI in Recruitment, a guide to mitigating algorithmic bias.
That's the one. Our mission today is to figure out exactly how these algorithmic black boxes are grading us, why they sometimes get it horribly, horribly wrong, and, the incredibly inventive ways the world's top companies are trying to fix them.
Yeah, and to understand why companies have handed over the keys in the first place, you really have to look at the sheer scale of modern hiring. I mean, industry estimates show that over 75% of large enterprises now use some form of automated hiring.
Wait, 75%? That is huge.
It's massive. But the economic incentive is it's undeniable. Organizations are reporting a 40 to 60% reduction in the time they spend on initial screening.
Which makes sense. I mean, a single corporate job posting can receive, thousands of applications in a day?
Easily. Thousands within 24 hours. These systems process a volume of candidates that would just completely crush a human HR department.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it sounds like we've handed the keys to the HR department over to a super fast robot, but we totally forgot to check if the robot has any bad habits.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it.
We know why companies want this: speed, efficiency, cost savings. But I want to get into the actual mechanics. Like, what is actually happening in those 3 minutes between hitting submit and getting a rejection? It can't just be a simple keyword search, right? Looking for the word synergy or whatever.
No, it's far more complex than a keyword search. Modern automated hiring systems primarily use natural language processing, or NLP, to ingest your resume.
Okay, NLP.
Right, so the software doesn't read your resume the way a human does. It converts your text into mathematical vectors, extracting data points and mapping relationships between your skills and the job requirements.
Oh, wow. So it's turning my English degree into math.
Basically, yeah. And from there, machine learning models step in to generate a literal fit score. And in some cases, the evaluation goes way beyond text.
What do you mean, like beyond the resume?
Yeah. Certain platforms utilize automated video interviews. The software analyzes your voice cadence, your word choice, and even your facial micro-expressions to evaluate your potential.
Wait, analyzing facial micro-expressions? So, like, a slight frown while I'm thinking about an interview question could mathematically lower my fit score.
It absolutely could, yeah.
That feels like a massive leap from just evaluating whether I have, 5 years of accounting experience.
It is a massive leap. And the core of the technical architecture driving all of this is something called supervised machine learning.
Supervised machine learning. Okay, break that down for me.
So the algorithm is trained by analyzing labeled historical data. To teach the machine what a quote-unquote good candidate looks like, engineers feed it thousands of past profiles from the company's history.
I see. So they look at the past to predict the future.
Exactly. It looks at who a company hired in the past, who's promoted, who stayed for 5 years. And then it identifies statistical patterns to apply to new candidates. It essentially automates the implicit decision rules of past human hiring practices.
But past human hiring practices aren't exactly known for being perfectly fair or objective.
No, definitely not.
So if the machine is learning from our past decisions, it's fundamentally learning our historical flaws. Like, if a company historically only hired men for a certain engineering role, the machine is going to notice that pattern.
Yes. That is the core vulnerability of supervised learning. And honestly, the most famous illustration of this vulnerability is the experimental resume screening tool built by Amazon a few years ago.
Oh, I remember reading about this.
Yeah, Amazon wanted an engine where they could input 100 resumes, and the software would just automatically spit out the top 5 candidates. But the historical data they used to train the system came predominantly from the male-dominated tech industry of the past decade.
So the algorithm logically concluded that being male was a statistical predictor of success.
Exactly. It was
Yeah.
it was wild. The system actually started actively penalizing resumes that included the word women's.
Wait, literally penalizing the word.
Yes. So if you were the captain of the women's chess club, your resume was mathematically downgraded. It even penalized graduates of two specific all-women's colleges.
That is insane. But let me push back on the tech industry here. I mean, if these engineers are supposedly the smartest folks in the room, building the most advanced technology on Earth, how did they not see this coming? Isn't the whole point of using a machine that it's supposed to be objective?
Well, what's fascinating here is that from a purely mathematical standpoint, the machine was being completely objective
Wait, how is penalizing women objective?
because it was objectively optimizing for a deeply flawed set of historical data. You see, the algorithm doesn't have a concept of gender or prejudice or societal context.
Right, it's just code.
Exactly. It simply recognized a statistical pattern of past success, which happened to be heavily skewed toward men, and it enforced that pattern ruthlessly. The engineers told the AI to find people who mathematically resemble successful past employees, and the AI executed that command perfectly.
Wow. So the algorithm is just a mirror. And if the past looks a certain way, the algorithm makes sure the future looks exactly the same, all while hiding behind the illusion of technological objectivity.
Yes, that illusion of objectivity is what makes this so incredibly challenging, and it creates a severe ripple effect on both the candidates applying for these jobs and the organizations trying to hire them.
Let's talk about the candidates first, because
Mm.
the biggest issue seems to be this massive information asymmetry.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, as an applicant, you just get a generic rejection email. You have absolutely no idea what hidden criteria the machine used to filter you out. You don't know if you lack the specific skill or if the NLP just, didn't like the formatting of your PDF.
And that opacity severely disadvantages specific types of people. I mean, consider career changers, self-taught professionals, or someone with a resume gap because they were caring for a sick family member.
Right, people who don't fit a perfect corporate mold.
Exactly. These candidates inherently do not fit the historical linear pattern of success. The algorithm doesn't know how to weigh resilience or the adaptability required to learn a new industry. It just sees a mathematical deviation from the historical norm and filters that candidate right out.
And the research points out how insidious this gets with proxy variables, too.
Oh, proxies are a huge problem.
Because the AI might be programmed to explicitly ignore race, gender, or age, but it finds proxies for those things anyway. Like, for age bias, it might not explicitly ask for your birth date, but it mathematically penalizes your graduation year.
Right. Or the fact that you list proficiency in older software.
Yeah. And for geographic bias, the system might essentially redline certain zip codes because it learns location-based patterns that happen to mirror historical residential segregation.
It's remarkably efficient at finding those hidden connections.
It's like having a harsh bouncer at a club who won't tell you the dress code but still kicks you out for violating it.
That's a perfect analogy.
But here is the piece I'm stuck on. If I'm a CEO and I find out my incredibly expensive new AI is secretly rejecting highly qualified, diverse talent because of some zip code proxy, aren't I just losing out to my competitors? Why aren't massive corporations absolutely terrified of this?
Well, the rustling of legal papers in boardrooms everywhere will tell you that the ones paying attention are deeply terrified.
Oh, so they were scared.
Terrified.
Yeah.
The legal exposure alone is staggering. Under disparate impact laws like those enforced by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the frameworks in the European Union's proposed AI Act, you do not have to prove that a company intended to discriminate.
Wait, intent doesn't matter.
Intent is totally irrelevant. If a facially neutral algorithm disproportionately disadvantages a legally protected group, the company deploying that algorithm is liable.
So pointing at the server room and saying, the computer did it, we didn't know, is not a valid legal defense.
Not at all. Legally, the company owns the outcome of the algorithm. And beyond the legal risk, an unchecked system completely hollows out a company's diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Right, and that ruins employer branding.
Exactly, because top talent will actively avoid organizations known for opaque or unfair hiring practices. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the societal stakes are what truly matter here.
How so?
A biased algorithm doesn't just ruin one job application.
Yeah.
Because these software platforms are used at scale across thousands of companies simultaneously, they have the power to automate inequality across entire industries. They can systematically reduce labor market access and compound intergenerational wealth gaps on a massive scale.
Okay, so the stakes are sky high, the legal risks are massive, and the black box is fundamentally flawed. If you're a company that still needs to hire, say, 10,000 people this year, how do you actually fix this?
It's tough, but it's
Yeah.
possible.
If the algorithm is just a mirror of our bad habits, how do we change the reflection? The sources suggest it has to start before the AI is even turned on.
It absolutely has to start with the data itself. You
Yeah.
cannot train an equitable AI on a biased data set. Accenture actually provides a really compelling model for getting this right.
What did Accenture do?
Well, before they deployed their AI screening systems, they decided to rigorously audit their historical hiring data.
Hmm?
And during that audit, they discovered that certain highly desired technical skills were disproportionately linked to candidates from a very small handful of specific elite educational institutions.
Ah. And if they just fed that historical data into the machine, the AI would learn to only hunt for candidates from those specific universities.
Precisely. It would effectively shut out brilliant coders who went to state schools or coding boot camps.
Uh,
The system would learn a false correlation, basically saying only people from University X are good at this job.
so what was their fix?
Instead of using that poisoned data, Accenture took a manual approach. They actively recruited diverse candidates to create a brand new, clean training set.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, they forced the algorithm to learn from a representative sample of what success could look like, not just a historical record of what it did look like.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about it like baking. If you realize your grandmother's famous cake recipe actually tastes terrible because the flour went bad 10 years ago, you don't just buy a faster oven to fix the problem.
Right.
You throw out the flour. The AI is just the oven. The historical data is the flour.
That is spot on. But cleaning the data is really just step one. The research notes that companies actually have to define fairness mathematically.
And that sounds impossible. I mean, how do you take a massive philosophical concept like fairness and turn it into a line of code?
Well, that is the central tension of algorithmic hiring right now. Machine learning researchers have identified multiple mathematical definitions of fairness. And the big problem is that satisfying one mathematical definition often inherently contradicts another. It's a zero-sum game in a lot of ways.
Break that contradiction down for me. How can two definitions of fairness conflict?
Let's look at the two most common metrics. You have demographic parity versus equal opportunity. Demographic parity means your hiring outcomes perfectly match the demographics of the general population.
Okay, so if the population is 50% female, the algorithm must select a pool of candidates that is 50% female.
Exactly. Equal opportunity, on the other hand, means that any qualified candidate, regardless of their demographic group, has the exact same statistical chance of being selected based purely on their skills.
But on the surface, those sound like they should naturally align. If you treat everyone with equal opportunity, shouldn't you end up with demographic parity?
In a perfect world, yes. But in a world with historical inequality, they almost never align.
Why?
Imagine a scenario where a specific qualification, say an expensive specialized computer science degree, is historically skewed toward one demographic because of societal wealth gaps.
Okay, I'm following.
If you program the algorithm to hire purely based on who holds that specific degree, which satisfies equal opportunity, you will mathematically fail to achieve demographic parity. You cannot satisfy both metrics simultaneously unless the underlying candidate pool is already perfectly equal.
Wow. So a company has to choose. They either adjust their standard to guarantee demographic parity, or they maintain a rigid technical standard and accept unequal demographic outcomes.
That's the dilemma.
That isn't just an engineering tweak. That is a profound philosophical choice about what the company actually values. How do massive organizations navigate a choice like that?
They often have to build hybrid systems to navigate the tension. JPMorgan Chase is a notable example of trying to balance this.
What was their approach?
They established demographic representation goals to aim for parity, but they implemented equal opportunity testing on the back end to ensure qualified people were still being treated equitably. And to manage this delicate balance, they created real-time dashboards for their recruitment teams.
Dashboards. But how does a dashboard help if the math inherently contradicts itself?
It acts as an early warning system. If the dashboard shows a sudden demographic disparity emerging in the selection rates for a specific job, recruiters are trained to stop the automated process and investigate.
Oh, so a human steps in.
Exactly. They have to ask, is this disparity happening because of a legitimate difference in candidate qualifications for the specific role? Or is the algorithm finding a new hidden proxy variable and reverting back to bias?
Which brings us to the next massive piece of the puzzle keeping humans in the loop. Because even if you clean the data, and even if you decide on your mathematical definition of fairness, you still have a machine making incredibly complex, opaque decisions about human livelihoods.
Right. We have to make sure human beings don't just become rubber stamps for the machine's outputs.
Exactly. So how do we do that?
That requires making the AI explainable. It's the concept of explainable AI. If a human HR reviewer doesn't know why the algorithm generated a fit score of 85 for a candidate, they cannot effectively oversee or correct the machine.
Makes sense.
Unilever tackled this opacity problem head-on when they replaced their traditional resume screening process with digital game-based assessments.
Oh, I've seen these. Candidates are asked to play these neuroscience-based games on their phones instead of just submitting a PDF of their work history.
Yes, exactly.
But how is a game actually fairer than a resume?
Because the games are designed to measure underlying cognitive traits like risk tolerance, pattern recognition, and adaptability, rather than focusing on where someone went to school or what past job titles they held.
That's a huge shift.
It is. But the critical transparency piece is that Unilever didn't just let the system spit out a generic pass or fail. The AI generated detailed capability profiles based on the gameplay.
So the hiring manager could actually see the math.
Yes, the hiring manager could see exactly which cognitive traits drove the candidate's score. And, vitally, the candidate received that exact same substantive feedback. The evaluation process was no longer a black box.
That transparency is crucial, but let me throw a wrench in this.
Okay, throw it.
Let's assume the AI is perfectly explainable. Let's be real about human nature. If I am an overworked recruiter trying to fill 50 open roles by Friday, and a multi-million-dollar computer system tells me, hire candidate A, they scored a 98 on the cognitive assessment, I am probably not going to dig into the capability profile.
You're just going to click approve.
Exactly. I'm just going to click approve so I can finally go to lunch. How does a company actually stop human reviewers from just defaulting to whatever the machine says?
That phenomenon is actually called automation bias, and it's the exact vulnerability that companies like Salesforce have identified. Their solution is to treat AI strictly as an assistant, never as a final decision maker.
How do they enforce that?
To enforce this, they built what they call bias interrupt protocols into their software.
Bias interrupt protocols. That sounds intense. What does that actually look like for the recruiter sitting at their laptop?
It looks like deliberate structured friction. If a Salesforce recruiter wants to override the AI's recommendation, or if they blindly accept an algorithmic ranking that looks statistically questionable based on the candidate's full profile, the system physically halts the workflow.
It just stops them.
Yep. It forces the human recruiter to stop and explicitly document their reasoning. They literally have to type out a justification for why they are making that specific choice before the software will let them proceed.
Oh, that is incredibly smart. If you force someone to stop and write a paragraph justifying their decision, it completely breaks the autopilot effect. You can't just be lazy if you have to defend your choice in writing.
It prevents the uncritical acceptance of the AI's output, but it serves a dual purpose. It also prevents purely subjective human bias from creeping back into the process.
You're right. You can't just say, I had a good feeling about this guy.
Exactly. The system is designed to create a structured, documented dialogue between human intuition and machine calculation. And to reinforce this, Salesforce also conducts regular calibration sessions. Human recruiters review borderline candidate cases together to ensure their subjective judgments remain aligned with the system's equity goals.
Okay, so tech giants like Salesforce and IBM have massive budgets and armies of engineers to build, monitor, and create friction within these bespoke systems. But what about the thousands of regular companies out there?
Yeah, the everyday businesses.
Right. Most businesses aren't building an AI from scratch. They're just buying recruiting software off the shelf from a third-party vendor.
If the algorithm is proprietary, how do you govern a black box you didn't even build?
That is where rigorous vendor management becomes the frontline defense. When you buy a commercial algorithmic platform, the underlying code is almost always a protected trade secret. You cannot look under the hood.
Right, they won't let you.
So the purchasing company has to establish incredibly strict technical due diligence during the procurement process itself. How do you negotiate with a black box? Are there examples of companies actually pushing back on these massive vendors?
The guide specifically highlights Hilton's approach to buying the HireVue platform as a masterclass in proactive vendor management. When Hilton purchased HireView's video interviewing platform, they refused to just deploy it as is.
What did they do?
They negotiated for the right to review the vendor's internal validation studies, and they insisted on running their own independent bias tests using Hilton's actual historical candidate data. And during this due diligence, research suggested that certain facial analysis and voice processing features could systematically disadvantage specific demographic groups,
Like who?
like non-native speakers or neurodivergent candidates.
So what did Hilton do? Just walk away?
No, Hilton took action. They actually required the vendor to turn those specific analytical features off for their implementation. They chose to rely solely on the text analysis components of the transcripts.
So what does this all mean? It's like buying a ridiculously fast sports car, but explicitly putting a governor on the engine because you know the specific roads you drive on are icy.
That's exactly it.
You cannot just buy an algorithmic tool and trust it blindly. You have to actively customize it for safety based on your own risk profile.
And importantly, that safety check is not a one-time event that ends at the point of sale. This raises an important question. How do you keep it safe over time? You need continuous monitoring.
Because the AI changes.
Yes, machine learning models are subject to something called drift. An AI that is perfectly fair and accurate on day one can gradually learn new biases as the job market evolves and new data flows into the system. IBM provides a perfect case study for the necessity of continuous monitoring.
What happened at IBM?
They built an open-source toolkit called AI Fairness 360, which was designed to constantly audit their internal systems for drift. And during one of these continuous audits, they discovered their own internal resume screener was actively disadvantaging self-taught coders and bootcamp graduates.
Why was it targeting them? Was it looking for specific keywords they lacked?
It was heavily weighting traditional four-year computer science degrees, because historically, that is what IBM had always hired.
Oh.
But the audit raised a fundamental question about the nature of bias. Who was actually wrong in this scenario? The AI, or IBM's historical hiring policy? The AI was correctly and accurately enforcing the rule it was given.
Right.
But when IBM audited the actual performance outcomes of their employees, they realized that possessing a traditional four-year degree did not actually predict job success any better than having a non-traditional background.
That is a massive realization. So the solution wasn't just to tweak the math in the algorithm to hide the bias. They had to fundamentally change their corporate hiring requirements to formally include non-traditional credentials.
Exactly.
The AI's rigid enforcement of the rules actually exposed a structural flaw in the company's underlying culture.
This is why AI fairness can never be viewed as a purely technical problem that can be solved with better code. It is fundamentally a sociotechnical challenge. It requires an organizational culture that is willing to question its most deeply held assumptions.
That's a big cultural shift.
Huge! You see this culturally at Microsoft, where they established the Ether Committee. They brought together technical engineering leaders, legal experts, and ethicists to review AI tools long before they launch. They don't just train engineers in code. They actively train them to consider the societal impact of their architectures.
And you see a similar cultural shift at LinkedIn, too, where they are leaning entirely into transparency.
Right, giving power back to the user.
Yeah, they are actively showing candidates exactly why they matched with a particular job posting based on the algorithm's criteria. They're even using direct feedback from the candidates to adjust and improve the algorithm in real time.
It's a totally different approach.
It is. They are shifting from a top-down model to essentially saying, let's build this matching system together.
Because the traditional model of technology development usually excludes the very people whose lives are most impacted by the algorithm. By bringing candidate voices into the loop and establishing advisory boards with diverse perspectives, companies can catch the structural blind spots that isolated engineering teams almost inevitably miss.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening journey through the invisible mechanics of modern hiring. If you take away anything from today's deep dive, whether you are the HR director purchasing the software or the candidate furiously tailoring your resume to beat it, it is this. Algorithmic hiring is not an objective magic wand that instantly removes human bias from the equation.
No, not at all.
It is fundamentally a mirror. It mathematically reflects our own historical inequalities back at us in cold hard code. But if an organization commits to proper governance, if they rigorously audit their data, maintain structured human oversight, and demand absolute transparency from their vendors, this technology can actually become a powerful tool to identify and break down structural inequalities rather than quietly enforcing them.
And Dr. Westover's research leaves us with a rather profound realization to consider as we conclude. He notes that recruiting algorithms alone cannot solve complex historical labor market
Right,
inequalities.
you can't fix the past.
But by aggressively auditing these AI systems for bias, we're essentially forced to perform a rigorous audit on our own society. If the algorithm is finally holding up a perfect, undeniable mirror to our deepest structural flaws,
Yeah.
is fixing the underlying code actually the easy part?
Wow.
The real question for you to explore after today is this. How do we use these algorithmic diagnoses to cure the underlying inequalities in the real world long before a candidate ever submits a resume?
That is a question that will definitely stick with you the next time you hit submit on an application and wait for that 3-minute email. Keep questioning the black boxes in your own life, and thanks for joining us on this deep dive.